Ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, both on the web and in front of the screens, dear panelists of today's discussion, it's a particular pleasure and honor to welcome all of you on behalf of Deutsches Verkehrsforum here at the InnoTrans Preview at the premises of Commerzbank near the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin. And I think I can be very brief in this introduction. And that is because I'm going to hand the floor of moderation over in a moment to a charming and competent person. Namely, it is going to be Susanne Landwehr from DVZ, which is Deutsche Verkehrszeitung. A warm welcome to you. The format of our event today has shown us how flexibly Deutsches Verkehrsforum has responded to the challenges posed by the COVID pandemic. InnoTrans, as we know, had to be postponed, but generally interesting questions related to rail and transport infrastructure are still relevant and indeed acute, and this is why we are holding this event of the Deutsche Verkehrsforum here today. And let me add one more thing. The corona pandemic has certainly provided a further impetus to the development of digital technologies. As a managing director of one of the large engineering companies in infrastructure, I was actually astounded to see how quickly we have managed to embrace those technologies in order to come up with a response to the corona challenge. And this is true not only internally within our organization, but also how we cooperate with our clients. So be it with or without corona, one thing is true and clear. Digital technologies will change fundamentally the way we work. It will make processes more effective, and by the way, as it comes to business travel, it will make our work economically and environmentally more friendly. But I'm asking you, what's going to happen once this corona dust has settled, so to speak? And then next year, all of us will need to remember that every euro you spend needs to be earned first. So will the priorities remain unchanged then? There's a current survey by the Association of German Engineers in which 24% of planning companies fear that in 2021 they'll be headed for an economic crisis. 25% of respondents have said that public orders have already been cancelled. 36% of respondents have also said that public bidding processes have either been also postponed or cancelled. Now we're seeing already that this will have a tangible impact also in the construction business activities of tomorrow. It has taken us too long before those findings found its way into political decision-making, because we all have responsibility to share vis-à-vis future generations. Any user limitations or speed limitations in Germany are not going to be very helpful. Indeed, they would be detrimental. The Verkehrsforum, as a mobility platform of important modes of transport, is certainly a strong engine, a motor to bring forward an understanding of insights of transport infrastructure development and spell that out into public good and political action. Now, with the other thing that is important and relevant in the corona pandemic, and I understand that people are individually affected, but one thing is true when we talk about the future, the economy and the public good, we need to act, we need to implement things going forward. Also, and in particular, in the area of transport infrastructure. And this is even more true if Germany doesn't want to fall behind in the globalized world. So, today, more than ever, we need to make sure that as we are securing our existing infrastructure, but also expand it and upgrade it, we need to do more. Also, because we want to maintain our climate action targets. We don't want to call into question what has already been achieved today. Now, what does that mean in specific terms? large-scale projects should not be put on the shelf. The federal budget and the future budget lines include a budget line that needs to be secured, because the investment master budget from 2019 to 2023 has an investment volume for federal rail projects of 33.8 billion euros. That must not be changed. An increase of funds, investment funds, to preserve railway infrastructure over the next 10 years comes with a budget of 86.2 billion euros, and that must be cast in stone. And not least of all, we need a comprehensive upgrade of control and safety systems, and also a changeover of interlocking systems to digital technologies, while at the same time financing the existence and the upgrading of rolling stock. Now, all of what I've said are elementary and correct targets going forward, but they are not going to be very helpful if there are individual projects that are subject to long, drawn-out approval processes. What would be the consequences? Well, the consequences would be that funds available could not be used in time, and that certainly doesn't contribute to a strengthening of the economy at large. Now, if we look also at our climate action targets that we want to implement rather than accept fines, it's true more than ever that planning and approval processes need to be streamlined, and they need to be accelerated, made more effective and efficient than is the case today. It is no good at all just to look at our neighboring countries, where obviously sometimes large-scale projects can be implemented much quicker than they can in this country. But it's about us. We need to act, and we need to work now. And it's certainly true also when we say that more needs to be done. We need to literally leap ahead in transport infrastructure in Germany. And also in Brussels, people should realize what we're doing in this country. In that context, let me also say that that topic of precluding objections on the European agenda is a bold and right step ahead. Any forms of project implementation must be put in the balance and must be critically reviewed. A quality-based project, I think, can also be achieved in a collaborative project with a number of partners where either side can draw a benefit within a clear level of system requirements. And that should be used going forward as well, because the past has already shown that if you carve out large-scale projects from the parent organization of project developers, have led to a major acceleration of those projects. And not least of all, I'd like to focus on project discipline. The detailed planning phases are too long. Now, often the ordering parties are making too many changes to their requirements because there's no really pressed deadline until which no changes can be made. So are we going to get a handle on those questions? Can we do it? Now, I personally am convinced we can do that. If we roll up our sleeves, if we act in a disciplined fashion, we can. Well, maybe not today, tomorrow, or beyond, but in the future, certainly we will. And this is actually the reason why we need to engage in this dialogue here today. And I must say that tomorrow we want to, and in fact we have to implement projects. But I think this is a challenge that is not directly related to what has been discussed in the past, namely the bottleneck of HR resources. Of course, it would be desirable for staffing levels to be adequately high also on the client side to make sure that they can implement their planning projects in due time. And it's also true that there are fundamental structural changes that will take time. And of course, it's clear that this will have an impact on staffing levels in other areas. But efficiency, I think, can not only be measured against the number of qualified staff available for a project. I think we need clearer targets, we need stringent leadership and support. And in view of the new generation of skilled labor, I think we should really take care of nurturing a new generation of experts. Because the challenges in transport infrastructure are not only exciting and motivating, they're creating a unique opportunity for people to actively shape the future of Germany and the German economy. So with that, again, I would like to thank you, and it's over now to Susanne Landwehr for the panel discussion. Thank you very much for your very interesting words of introduction. That was a good summary to start with. I also would like to welcome all of you, both here in the room and the ones who are watching us remotely. You talked about the mobility sector, and you've said it has been an important backbone of the economy and society. You talk about project discipline, about approval times that should be changed. You say there's a lack of personnel. You're talking about new generation. That is true. And until everything gets improved, there's still a lot of work ahead of us. And this is precisely what we would like to talk about today, namely, how can we get the priorities right? How can projects be accelerated? This relates to planning, that relates to funding, and also to the final execution of projects. Now, I'd like to ask all of you here in the room to download the Slido app, because you can now vote with a yes or no answer, and later on I'm going to announce the results of the survey. The question is, can the high available investments for rail infrastructure in 2020 and 2021 really be accessed? So please vote. Your access code would be DVF Schiene, all small letters. And now, for our first panel, I would like to welcome Søren Bartel, who is the Member of Parliament and Deputy Chair of the Parliamentary Group of the SPD. Hello, Mr. Bartel. Good to have you. Then we have Dr. Karl Runge, who is member of the Executive Board of Vossloh AG, a provider of rail infrastructure, product development and maintenance. Welcome, Mr. Runge. And Dr. Tobias Heinemann, Director of Transdev Germany and operator of rail and bus services in Germany. Thanks for being here. Mr. Bartel, we do have priorities, because in the Federal Transport Network Plan has 1,000 projects, out of which 400 are rail projects. The plan started in 2011. In 2016, Parliament has adopted the plan, and now we're in 2020. Are the priorities still correct in the Federal Transport Network Plan? And do you think that is the right priority forward? In the coalition agreement, we've attached major importance to rail infrastructure, not only on paper, mind you. We have a climate package and now also a corona stimulus package that also draw onto that. There's no lack of money, in other words. What is important now is that we filter projects from that major project base that really have a priority, like a synchronized timetable, frequency increase of nationwide rail services, good network coverage, digital technologies. Interlocking has just been mentioned, so everything that's part of that equation has to be thrown into the balance. We want to move more freight traffic onto rail, and we want to double our passenger numbers. So at the end of the day, these are the goals that need to be followed up with measures. Now, it's not for me to plan that, to build that. We have an executive board of Deutsche Bahn, we have a Federal Ministry of Transport that does that. But they must not lose focus. They mustn't jump on another bandwagon every other day, but say how the concept works. And I see Deutsche Bahn has clear plans, how they stabilize cargo operations, how to implement the synchronized timetable. And let me say that this timetable has a target timeline of 2030. It may happen in 2040, because I don't think it's going to happen in 10 years, but I don't want it to happen only in 2060. Now, large projects like the digital coupling, we've been talking about, for 20 years, and it has existed already, but now we need to roll out digital couplings It's important also for cargo operations, and I think we need to move towards that now, full speed ahead. The Transport Ministry needs to set the right priorities, the Finance Ministry as well, and at the end of the day, the budget provider, our Parliament, have made a lot of money available. So we do have money. The question is how to spend those funds. And it all hinges on a fundamental problem in Germany. Planning just takes too long. We cannot make enough and quick progress. We are working now on legislation to speed up planning, because no one here will understand why if you upgrade an existing line and want to put up a new utility pole in this country, you need planning approval. It's unusual, really, and that needs to disappear. Which means the Transport Ministry, you're saying, needs to get the priorities right. But do you see any approaches that this is actually happening? Because we still work with the Federal Transport Network Plan as we speak. Well, let me put it like that. I do think Deutsche Bahn has a clear idea what they want to do with the additional equity, and there's a clear understanding and an agreement, and Europe has to approve that. Europe cannot, break us down. We need not the Deutsche Bahn, but general rail providers and rail infrastructure. There's not going to be any mobility turnaround, as we call it, without rail operation. But those in the ministries who are writing the funding programs, the ones who are upgrading train stations, the Deutsche Bahn is ready to get started, but the administrative work needs to be right, and that's the different ministries, economy, finance, and transport. They need to do their homework. And we, as a coalition partner, can actually build up some pressure there, but those who are heading a ministry are the ones that set the benchmarks. Mr. Heinemann, what would the government need to do, and what would you need to do to make sure you ensure smooth train operations? Now, let's start with us. In 2020, all transport undertakings, private or public, municipal, need to do anything they can possibly do to send out the signal to everyone in public that it's safe to return to our buses and trains. And this is a demanding task for all of us in the industry. In March and April, we've seen a major slump in passenger numbers. Up to 90% was the slump, and same is also true for Deutsche Bank and others, both for public and private operators. And now slowly and gradually passengers are returning to our trains and buses, but it's up to us to really place the right message and instill in people's minds the understanding and the assurance that it's safe to come back to our transport solutions. And before we are asking ourselves, what can the government do for us, we need to look at what we can do. But then, having said that, it's true that also administration and government needs to make sure that we can deliver against our public service obligation with adequate funding and also with fair and adequate regulation. Now, this also means that rail infrastructure must be financed properly. We believe quite a few good milestones are already out there. The new service and financing agreement that has just been signed is good, but now, we need to walk the talk, making sure that organization gets better, fairer, and we'll talk in a minute, I think, about how this can be improved. For instance, on routes where it's not Deutsche Bahn, but other transport undertakings, their wishes, their requirements and demands are not only be heard, but actually put into practice. Can you give us an example? Well, our company is operating the branch lines, about 9,000 kilometers of secondary lines we have in Germany, quite a sizable volume. And there the market share of Deutsche Bahn is clearly below 10%. So especially in the peripheral areas, we have private transport undertakings. But if you look where the investments go mostly into mainline networks and not regional networks. So, if you look at the switch towers in Upper Bavaria, they're really age-old. Something needs to be done there, and this is why we are saying more investment is required for branch lines, for secondary lines, to make sure work is done there as well. And I'm not again going to say, we need digital technologies. We need modern, say, level crossings, or if we had gated level crossings, that would be a lot already. But unfortunately, this is still not the reality in this country. Well, it sounds like you've said that a number of times before, but nothing has happened. Is that right? Yes, because I think priorities were not right in the past, and we, private operators, were not being heard adequately. This has improved, I must say that. So we had a roundtable on worksite management, which is a good example. But let me give you a few practical examples of the past months. We are operating the Bavarian Oberland train service. For this area, we've submitted 30 proposals to improve operations there. Not a single one of those proposals are part of the network plan. Why is that? Well, because they hear us, but they don't do what we ask them to. Why is that? What would you say? Well, let's understand that there is a number of corridors that people focus on. And sometimes they seem to forget. Deutsche Bahn wants to design a transport corridor that stretches across different federal states in the country and connects regions. Now we, as an industry player, are then hired or contracted by network operators to deliver, and obviously also commissioning authorities are the ones that contract us as well. Now what do? We need to have planning reliability. We need to know what's going to happen in the future, because today very often we're facing a problem whereas work measures are being announced, they're then postponed, and then for us in industry we don't know how to plan going forward. We can only get faster if our partners, collaborators, follow a certain timeline and plan, because we need staff, we need resources to implement a plan once we've received the green light. And secondly, a lot of the planning projects get bogged down because there's a dogma in Germany that says planners are not builders. In other words, we would have planning capacity, but we're not using this planning capacity, and we don't want to use capacities like that, because that would mean we would not be allowed to do building work, construction work. So there's a number of obstacles in the systems which mean that sometimes we are slowed down on the implementation side of things. And then you're saying they're focusing on some corridors, and then comes a time when the focus is getting lost by planners or operators. What does that mean? You think they're developing a corridor and then they're not doing it? Well, we know when we want to win additional capacity in the network, we have the major megatrends like ETCS, digital interlocking, but still need to look at the travelway as we have it today. And a lot of capacity you can gain or increase by improving individual capacities along the travelway. Now today as we speak, you are upgrading switches. You are trying to eliminate speed restriction sections in the network and similar things, just to boost the reliability of the overall system, the network, and increase available capacities. But we also know that the introduction of ETCS is much more advanced in other countries. And of course, digital interlocking would be required for that. You can't do ETCS without digital interlocking, of course. And now here comes the crux. Do we accept a certain version of ETCS or not? I mean, in Germany for years or decades we've been waiting for a decision to get started or not. Well, we need to stop just waiting. We need to begin this work. But this will take some time. But we are beginning it. I mean, this standardized chaos, as I would call it, let's leave that out of the equation. But we are working, we are supporting, we are funding. And it's true, you can always be faster, just like in the digital coupling. Of course, we are still missing in a European standard. It makes no sense at this point to establish an isolated system just for this country. in our service and financing agreement, there's a record amount of investments available. We are supporting the existing network, we're upgrading it. This is also clearly spelled out in the Federal Transport Network Plan and our synchronized timetable project. And I must say, I've been on this job for a while, and I'm wondering when people say there are some critical railway junctions or nodes, I'm wondering once we finally get them to work. Just recently, I've seen an example from my constituency where a train station was to be upgraded and the planner made some mistakes, and then all of a sudden the blocking interval was lifted, so they had to apply for a new blocking pause, and it takes another couple of years, and no one's happy about that. But this is also because we're working at our capacity limits at the moment. Freight trains, for instance, we need to get our block sections longer. All of that is related to digital technologies. And I must repeat again, we're spending a lot of money in the budgets, but the question is, can we access them, or can operators access them? Now we have tangible targets for electrification, so the money is there and we need people to spend those funds. And now, once we work on legislation to speed up planning, we make sure that something is changing for the better in this country. Now, on EDCS, I think there's no way around it. It will happen, of course, but all I can say, we are talking about a system that is a wheel rail system, not just a rail system. So in terms of ETCS, please remember you need to convert rolling stock as well. Conversion must be guaranteed. Now, Mr. Bartol, this goes back to you. Just recently, we've looked at the draft for the federal budget in 2021. We found plenty of projects, ETCS projects, but with the exception of the Stuttgart conurbation, there was no mention made of conversion of rolling stock. And once again, it's a wheel rail system, not just a rail system. Please remember, in terms of ETCS, we need to convert vehicles, rolling stock that is, because the system can only be funded and operated if this conversion becomes a reality. And this is something that has been discussed known for quite a while. People know that. Mr. Herrmann from the Stuttgart area, you know exactly what we're talking about, and you have solved the problem there for the remaining 36.5 thousand kilometers of track length. It has not been solved yet. Now, Mr. Bartol, can you imagine why this is not in the law? Well, let me say that when you convert brake systems in freight rolling stock, that works, and you have to fund everyone, not only individual operators. And it makes no sense if you have a nice route network and your engines can't run on them properly. So we have to do it, no doubt about it, but incrementally, piece by piece, because there's so much information in that law, it needs to be put in practice. But then you're saying that a lot. You need to do it, and we will realize we need to do it. It's still not happening. Well, you're talking to a member of parliament here. I'm not working for Deutsche Bahn. I'm not a minister. I'm not a state secretary in the transport ministry. So at the end of the day, it's about, parliament taking decisions, government taking decisions. And that's what we did in our coalition agreement. We attached a focus for rail transportation, ambitious targets, I must say, but we spelled them out in real terms. This is only how we can achieve a proper mobility turnaround. And with our climate action package, there's a lot of money in the rail package, and I think we all realize for the entire industry, Corona or the COVID crisis has been really a watershed moment, but still we have taken the right decisions. But then at the end of the day, it needs to happen. But a lot is actually happening. If you look at the rail infrastructure at the moment, there's many work areas, work sites, sometimes at the detriment of reliability of the system, but we're coming to some capacity limitations here, because what needs to happen is trains need to operate reliably from A to B. And it's true, in 2020 we don't talk about whether adequate funds are available in that modal split that we want to achieve. The question is, okay, money is there, but how do we take the money and do that, use this money in work sites? And customer-friendly work organization is certainly very important. I'm really grateful to Mr. Befalle from Deutsche Bank to address that. And we often criticize DB, rightly so, but I think the problem is how do we implement the strategies that all of you have. Now, a work site very often is scheduled for 7 days. On day number 6, DBNet tells us we'll be finished on day 7. Then on day 7, they are telling us we'll be finished in 10 hours' time. And then at the end of the 7th day, they're telling us, oh, sorry, we cannot complete it. It's going to take another 3 days. Although all our schedules and plans are already in place, and we have to scrap them again. We organize replacement services, and this is really a frustrating experience to many customers. So we need better alignment, early escalation of problems. I mean, maybe schedule your worksite for 10 days longer. Don't try and squeeze it into a tiny time window that you cannot deliver against. In the Rosenheim area, we had a worksite that was completed 1 day early, and I really applauded that. This is exactly what we need. Don't squeeze your time windows for repairs in too small a period, but be generous and then deliver against your promise. Now, Mr. Runge, do you agree that time windows for repairs should be extended? Well, up front, let me tell you that Deutsche Bahn is actually doing a good job, I think. The Investment Acceleration Act helps. We have a good service and financing agreement, and you still need a lot of coordination and planning work, and we all agree that this is hard to reconcile your transportation work from your rail work or repair work. So to straddle this line is very hard. And there's another issue, like if you're upgrading an existing infrastructure. I mean, you know, when you do home improvement, what does that mean? You're chiseling open your wall, you think there's a cable underneath, but there's not a cable, there's a water pipe. And I'm not saying this happens for a rail project, but what I'm saying is that if you're upgrading existing infrastructure, it's full of surprises. You learn new things literally every day. So therefore, can you extend the planning period for a rail work? Well, maybe you shouldn't, but I hear a lot from people who work in the field, because we work in maintenance as well. We're giving time slots for repair, but then all of a sudden those time slots are not available anymore. And if my shift only offers you 2 hours of work, you cannot perform the job for which you require 8 hours. So let us think whether we do an organization of replacement services or runaround services that would be acceptable, but at least that increases the efficiency of repair and maintenance work. So if you need a partial closure of your line, but still during that partial closure your contractors can work 24/7, that is beneficial for all of you. You end your work project earlier. You do not need to mobilize and demobilize your work teams, but you get to work 24/7. And maybe these are decisions that are not always very popular, and this is also something that politicians have to accept, that there may be bad press about projects like these, but maybe this is a way to accelerate the work and to create adequate network capacity to make sure that those few work sites we have are not really pulling us down too far. Okay, so you talked about speeding up planning. Do you think that all the legal risks are now covered? In other words, are these laws enough to get down to work finally now? Well, at the end of the day, we don't have any reference projects. We know that for all large infrastructure projects in Germany, we often get bogged down in some problems where we have legal uncertainty, new phenomena spring up for whatever reason, also because there's a lack of public support. So here's my question. How do we make sure that we bring concerned citizens on board as well early on before a project starts? So they need to understand, okay, we're working on something bigger, and that may cause some individual problems or disruptions, and people need to be prepared for that. Now that's a truth that we must not hide in front of the population. We should be very open and reaching out to them. Let's take as an analogy the big Südlink, which is the high voltage transmission line that is being built from north to south in Germany with 50,000 people affected. Excellent outreach work they're doing, neighborhood involvement groups. We'll see how that works, but I think there are models for public participation that is really laudable. Yes, that's true. We have a number of projects for population management, or if you will, outreach work. But Mr. Heinemann, do you think those laws will really work? Will they accelerate production? Do you think certain target groups or people will be disregarded or overlooked? You know, it's a living system. At the end of the day, you want to make sure that people who are concerned or affected are also on board. Any large-scale infrastructure project just starts on paper with a sketch of figures, sometimes very unrealistic figures. I think we must be more transparent and straightforward. Sometimes there are big projects for which you cannot artificially lower the budget. They cost a lot of money, and you need to talk about it. And we need to do a lot of, well, upstream work, if you will. Talk to people at a level playing field. I remember when they built a new runway at Frankfurt Airport, they had citizen involvement where they rented a gym, put up hundreds of meters of document binders. But no one's doing that anymore. But look at how we are developing the trans-European networks with the big corridors, high-speed links. And also in Parliament, we have decided that we do more than we would actually need by law to get people on board. In Hanau, the Frankfurt-Mannheim route, which is now being planned, and we're approaching the finishing stretches here. For this, you need to involve the region. You need to understand people's concerns. If you violate people's concerns, your project will take forever. And obviously that takes a lot of money or extra money to have people involved for community outreach, or it's taken out of your investment projects. Or take the Fehmarn Belt and the hinterland connections, no matter whether that tunnel will be built or not. Even there we had a close community outreach program with people. But the fundamental understanding is there will always be people out there who want to enforce their will, also legally enforce their will. Now there we are needing to develop a procedure where those concerns go to the Federal Administrative Court. But at the end of the day, we are a highly connected democratic society, and therefore I don't think it makes any sense at all to negate citizens' concerns. And I said that also in a speech in Parliament the other day. For people who think they want to change the Aarhus Convention, haven't understood how international law works. If you want to change an international convention, it takes you 20 years before the first discussions will be completed. It will not accelerate any planning project. Now, do you think the reference date rule needs to be reintroduced? Because we had to cancel it, take it out of the law because there was a complaint on the part of the European Commission, and now the discussion is we reintroduce the reference date, and plaintiffs can challenge possibly infrastructure projects or to prevent an infrastructure project. But at some point we need to stop that and then continue with planning and construction. At the latest, I think it was at the latest coalition committee, we agreed on a working group. The legislation process is ongoing, including electrification projects. And now the coalition will go back to that. We got a paper from the Federal Chancellery just recently, and I would caution you to take that too seriously, because it would cause some unrest in society and will not accelerate planning. But suffice to say, we have a working group that looks into that, and I'm open and ready for everything that is reasonable and feasible. What does the paper say from the Federal Chancellery? I'm not going to tell you. Oh, that's too bad. Many people would be interested anyway. But what was the law you just talked about? It was the Electrification Law and many other things. But it actually makes mention of not needing additional project approval or planning approval for electrification of existing lines. We need to work on that. We don't make mention of the public transport system, like trams or underground systems. So that should be in there, I think. More need works to be done. And we'll see what we could do in Parliament to optimize processes from there. Now, I think alternative fuels or alternative drive technologies should be mentioned. We have many diesel-operated lines. I don't think that all of them will be electrified soon. So at least we need to look at hydrogen, which is a new fuel technology to replace diesel operations. So I would be welcoming any signal for some government support for this technology. I'm always happy to get the information from other experts, and they always tell me it's always better to electrify a line rather than banking on hydrogen. So if anybody else believes the opposite, I'm certainly happy to take that on board. I'm always in favor of electrification. Where that doesn't work, I would be happy to accept other technologies. But electric lines is what we have written in paper in the coalition agreement. Okay, planning acceleration is what we talked about. Mr. Runge, do you think there's enough staff in administration and government bodies to make that happen? I think it depends on the government office or the planning authority, and it depends on the project. So making a general statement here would be neither right nor wrong. But I do think that planning capacities must be pooled, and we must make sure that we try to minimize the interfaces we have between the different function areas. In other words, if you have too many overlaps in planning and planning disciplines, that complicates processes. Now we have digital technologies like the BIM, the Building Information Modeling, or when you work in existing line upgrades, you need to have a good understanding of the status quo of the existing situation. And if you have different stakeholders in there, that gets difficult. You need the Federal Railway Authority to get a good supervision of what is happening. But these new technologies like BIM could help us to accelerate planning and approval processes, provides good reliability for the actual execution of work. But if we want to do really much more than so far, we need to hire more qualified staff. And this goes back to what I said before. Planning reliability is what we need, because it's a huge program, it is an ambitious one, and we need more people to do that. What are the interfaces you're talking about? How many interfaces you're talking about in rail projects? Can we have a specific example? Depending on the rail project, of course, but now let's take a route for which you have a geologist to check your earth structure, your substructure. Then you need to hire a construction company for the permanent way and the rail track, and then actually someone gets into the project to put up the utility poles. Then you have signaling and security and safety technology to be established. So it's a multifaceted variety of contractors, and their interfaces, their contact lines between each other need to be harmonized. Their times and scheduling have to be harmonized. And sometimes you're just lacking the qualified staff that can do that. That is a special challenge. Now, here comes the question. We need to shoulder those projects in a collaborative effort. Now, what I'm missing here is the integration or the involvement of operators in the planning process. Now, if we were being told, okay, our work project starts next week, we should be told a week before when that happens so we can organize a replacement service, etc. But why are we not involved in the process of preparation of a work site? Or maybe we stretch an interval from 2 to 4 hours before an actual work site starts. And then I'm saying, Mr. Herman, I don't think that the clients or the ones that are ordering transport services to accept such an extension of an interval in the run-up to an actual work project. But it would help us a lot to get ready in a downscaled operation scenario to prepare for the time when the line has to be shut down. We always think in the categories of begin of work and end of work, but we seem to forget that up front there's a lot of preparatory work where all of us need to cooperate. Room for improvement, in other words, and I think we could do more together here to make sure that we work according to schedule. So we don't want to have all these delays that make us crazy. Are you getting involved in construction planning as well? Well, my company, of course, not so much, because we're component suppliers and we work on maintenance issues. But when it comes to maintenance work, I can say that we get involved by the different contractors and commissioning parties, and it's different from country to country. We don't only work here in Germany, but also in other European countries, and indeed overseas. So the picture is different there. But generally, For maintenance and service, the conditions are being created, of course, for daily meetings, briefings, and I know colleagues who are out there in the field doing the construction work, they're always in the know and there's regular alignment meetings. But even then, if a planning mistake is made, sometimes a work site comes to a halt. And that happens time and again because of incorrect planning. Entire work sites are shut down for an extended period of time. And that obviously is a difficulty. Mr. Bartel. No, I think it's a genuine challenge to do rail work, and not many people understand that, and this is why you have the competing interests of some providers who say, why don't we close a line, do the work in one stretch, and then open again? But we often say, don't do that necessarily. Be careful on capacity. Leave some residual capacity open to make sure we are not. We don't have our passengers left out in the rain. And it costs more money. It's true, and that's rightly so. Sometimes you have to be ready to spend more funds to operate or to have a worksite operate properly. Now, if you want to close down a main line for 6 months, nothing will happen. And the positive thing about a rail network is whenever you stop to operate it, people realize how complex the system is and how important it is. I mean, a train cannot circumvent the blocked area by running through a dirt track. Doesn't work. Works on road, doesn't work on rail. So therefore, we need to harmonize this work with public and private operators. It's a highly complex system. Plus, if you factor in the additional disruptions where you're planning a good work site, you know how it works from A to B, and then all of a sudden you get a fire on a wooden sleeper and you need the fire brigade coming in, and that ruins your entire work project, including the diversion route. This is something that doesn't happen in road transport, but it does happen in rail transport. A while ago, we had a good roundtable project on worksite management, and under the auspices of Mr. Pefalla, we have jointly discussed what needs to be discussed in the run-up and the preparation of work sites, and this is a good platform, and our suggestion is to use this platform also on a regional level in the different federal states. Why don't we schedule an annual meeting every autumn, say in Bavaria or Baden-Württemberg, and let's critically look at upcoming work sites for the coming year, that is, and maybe already today we talk about what we can do in order to prepare ourselves better. It brings in private operators or DB Regio to make sure that we're all on the same page. And we're missing that at the moment. A lot has been done, as I said, on a nationwide level, and I think we need to drill down deeper on a regional level. Certainly also with the involvement of the commissioners, the state authorities, that would take us further in that. Thank you very much. That was a very good closing word for this round. We talk later about financing and implementation. Thank you very much. And now, finally, I would like to announce the results of our vote. So, you remember we earlier asked the question of can the high investment funds that are available, can these also be accessed for 2020 and 2021? And 52% of respondents say yes, and 48% said no. So that's pretty close. Now I would like to begin talking about funding. Finance Minister Olaf Scholz just today introduced the budget for 2021, and a lot of money is in that system now. For rail and waterways, 18.6 billion euros are in that budget. Rail is going to get 10 billion euros from different funding sources. So this is a record amount of money, and we hope a lot will happen. But funding alone is not all. The money has to be used also. And this is what we'd like to talk about first. Larissa Zeichert is first, Managing Director of Lautfunkanlagenservice. You do rail and safety technology. Welcome. And please sit in the middle. Then we have Winfried Herrmann, the Minister of Transport of the state of Baden-Württemberg. Hello, welcome. And Ronald Pefalla, the Head of Infrastructure at Deutsche Bahn. It's great to have you.
Die Zuhörer und Zuschauer sind ja sehr optimistisch, dass das Geld abfließt. Sie sagten kürzlich,
Our audience has been very optimistic, as we've heard, about using those funds. And I read on your website of Deutsche Bahn that in times like ours, like in Corona times, construction work is really an economic stimulus package for German economy. Do you think German Rail is a good provider of economic stimulus? Well, definitely. Just look at the numbers there. We have an investment volume this year in terms of infrastructure of 12.2 billion euros. If you take the past 3 years, for every year we spend an additional 1 billion euros, which means for next year we're already talking about, as we calculate, 13.5 billion euros. We really manage to get those funds to work like a Swiss clockwork. Just to give you one number. Just last week we discussed about that. From January until last week we had about 1,400 work sites. Out of those 1,400 work sites, rail work sites, only 19 had to be delayed. And those were, without going into the details, those were related to Corona-related issues, normally at construction companies who for a number of reasons didn't have the personnel available to complete the job. So, can you give me any other industry that can handle such projects in such a precise way as rail infrastructure? So all I can say is that, we are a boost for the economy. Or take the federal budget. We were asked by the federal government whether we can do more or whether we can set the right priorities. And I said, yes, of course we can. And then the federal government this year has added 14 million euros in the funding scheme for train stations, which we're going to use by the end of the year. The federal budget that has been taken or adopted today includes another 120 million euros for train stations that we're going to invest next year. Or take infrastructure. For 500 million euros we'll receive additionally from the stimulus package. 100 million this year that we are going to spend this year and the remaining 400 million next year. Because those 500 million euros will be spent until the end of next year to modernize interlocking systems. So we're doing that within our own organization. And I must say I'm really grateful to industry players because we have agreed with the German Railway Industry Association to identify a list of priorities to speed up projects. So with leaving aside the increasing investment packages, we want to make sure that this remains stable. There's one number that I'd like to provide here. With the agreement of the German rail industry, we want to make sure that in the 20s, in addition of the existing funds, we want to spend even more to convert projects into digital technologies, which is another 6 to 6.5 billion euros extra on top of the existing tens of billions that we already have. So I'm just saying this is just a success story. But you're right when you point out there's many things that need to be improved. I agree. Take the example of your regional roundtables as you've suggested them. I think these are absolutely necessary. Because what we're doing on a federal, mainline network is something we're doing better and better, and we have become better, I think. But when it comes to the regional networks, and this is what you mentioned, we're not as good yet. So you're right. And we're underfunded in regional networks. Or here's another example. Now, as we speak, we are doing a major reform of network organization on the 1st of October. And one area is the regional networks. I bring back regional networks into our mainline networks because it makes no point to distinguish between the federal networks and the regional networks. Either our system as one single system is stable or it is not. Stability we need to ensure across the board. So I'm very thankful also for this positive criticism I'm receiving here, negative as well, to say there is room for improvement, and we always take that into account. A lot has happened already. And finally, there's another number here. When I took over responsibility for infrastructure 3 years ago, we were talking about investments of 7 billion euros. Now we're at 12.2 and possibly, as I said, next year 13.5 billion. Our worksite management has been modified upon the recommendation of what you have also said. And we always receive good input from the travel or train operators. We are planning our work sites on a capacity base. What does that mean? In the past, we just had investment volume and the money was just spent wherever. And sometimes that led to a situation that we had massive disruptions because transport operators were not consulted at all. And now we're doing it the other way around, and even there we need to get better, but I'm saying we're doing this better than we have in the past. So all of our work sites are now capacity oriented. We're investing 3 billion euros more than in the last years. Worksite related disruptions were reduced by 40%. Still there's room for improvement, but we're investing more and we have fewer disruptions. And this is why I'm interested in those dialogue meetings, dialogue platforms, because the suggestions, the impetus we get also from the industry are vitally important. So I can only support you in what you have said. That type of optimization is what we need. Okay, so you're saying you bring the regional lines back into the federal package. When will the first results be visible? Now, for many years, rail network has been underfunded. That's a fact of life. And you cannot catch up within 5 years what has been neglected in 25 or 30 years. That's a reality too. But we're gaining speed now. And I think I'm confident to say that our decade is the ongoing decade that allows us to catch up for what has not been done in the many decades before. We are going to see a better quality, a better performance of the overall network throughout the decade. Now, Ms. Seichert, you are working on a project basis at the track side. Do you think that Deutsche Bahn is a boost for the economy? I certainly agree. And what I liked is that Mr. Pefalla used the first person. He says, I can do it, I can build it. So please join my company tomorrow. But that, of course, all joking aside, also means that we have a number of levers that we can work on together. Our company really is at the end of the food chain, if you will. We are rather a subcontractor. But what is true is that we're running out of qualified staff, qualified technicians. Not only, site foremen, but actually people who do the work on the ground. We're lacking them. And I'm really welcoming the fact that so much more money now gets invested into rail, but we need the people that build it all. So, a lot has been mentioned already about passenger-friendly rail construction. Well, the fact of the matter is we can only work then at nights during holidays and in smaller sections, rail sections. And this is not going to work, sorry. Because we cannot complete our job, we're not going to be efficient, and people who work at night, towards the end of the shift, they actually get the time to do their work. This is not an attractive job. People will run away from us if we offer such work conditions. So passenger-friendly is all fine, but it must be practicable. But do you think there's enough money in the system now to accelerate construction work? Yes, absolutely. I'm so happy that I'm working here in the industry. This is the first time that we have adequate funds. So capacities need to go up because we still feel there's not enough construction oversight. I mean, Deutsche Bahn is doing a lot. They're recruiting a lot of experts for site supervision, so they're doing good advertising work, career work here in our industry. But I think this needs to get better because precisely site supervision makes projects efficient. And secondly, it's project management. Again, a lot has happened, but if we want to spend the money, so spend the money means use the money and invest it in the track side, we need to see more improvement there as well when it comes to oversight. Coming back to funding, Mr. Herrmann, there's a number of funding sources. There is the service and financing agreements, there are communal or municipal funding schemes, but there are other systems like in Switzerland for transport finance. Do you think that is meaningful? Well, before I answer your question, let me say something else, and I'll come back to that in a moment. In the past years, we've managed to do many good things to make funding robust. In my first term as minister from 2011 to 16, together with other transport ministers, I've been fighting for 5 years to get more funding into our system. And for about 4 years now, we've seen a major improvement, so we're in a much more comfortable situation. This is true for road as it is for rail, mind you. So yes, we are in a good position, and Mr. Pefalla has just been able to show us what has happened, where capacity increases have been shouldered, and really Deutsche Bahn is doing a much better job now on the implementation side. But I'd like to caution you, we shouldn't be naive to believe that there's just a little uplift now that will fizzle out in a couple of years' time. I think we'll need at least 20 more years of hard work to catch up with what has not been done in the past 40, maybe 50 years in freight traffic, in technology, in modal splits, in extension upgrading of new lines or high-speed lines, plus also regional operations. Some of the wrong priorities in the past decades were related to the fact that most of the money just went into high-speed links, large projects, and the secondary lines were basically neglected without any priority at the time. So there, clearly, we need to take a fresh look. We mustn't compete regional versus mainline, but they need to complement each other. So finally now, here's more money. And a couple of years ago, I would have said, let's think about a new system. But now, if you were to think about a new funding system, it'll take us another 5 or 10 years until we have a new funding mechanism ready. So rather, let's say, look at the budgets. The budgets are really generous for rail extension, for upgrading, and actually for improvement. I think we need many more funds, so we're not at the end there yet. I just got some numbers today, and I heard that Deutsche Bahn has 25,000 bridges. Majority of them are between 80 and 100 years. Imagine that. So you know when new bridges need to be built. And coming back to what has been said before, we now, in the Federal Council, have prepared a good project for parliamentary scrutiny for speeding up of planning. Namely, you don't need a planning approval if you're just electrifying an existing line. You don't need a separate planning approval because you're replacing a bridge, etc. So these are just a few examples, and there was an urgent necessity. I have to be very clear and openly say that we had seen situations in infrastructure planning that were unacceptable. To build a bicycle path takes you 10 years, or for a city bypass road, 30 years. In rail extension, we're talking about planning horizons of 30 to 60 years. Think about the Rhine Valley Railway. It has taken us 30 years, and we're not even halfway through. Switzerland has built 2 tunnels, or 3 tunnels, and those were not easy and cheap either. So, here is what I'm saying. We need to get faster. In addition to extension, we have to do a lot of rail improvement, and this is going to be a major effort. The new train link between Mannheim and Stuttgart was the first one, the first high-speed link. It's now being repaired after 25 years in service. 180 kilometers needs to be upgraded. The entire stretch is closed. There was no alternative, no passenger-friendly solutions. We had to close the line because there's a tunnel in between. You cannot build or repair and still run trains through there. The travel time between Mannheim and Stuttgart is now more than twice as much as it was before, if you're lucky. Because obviously the new high-speed link was a direct shot between A and B. And you'll see, when we are improving existing train lines, we don't have any redundancies in the system anymore. We have to do major diversions, and you cannot do it by an alternative bus service either. Now, we have to work more, we have to win over more passengers, more trackside work. I mean, still quite a few improvements are possible, of course, but that finally now takes me back to your earlier question. I would think we must make sure that a project, once it has started, all the funding issues are resolved. So you don't want to be working in a project that needs to be chopped up into 20 different sections, and for every section you need separate funding. That's not acceptable. So ideally, I mean, you do that in road construction, mind you. There are procedures in place where you put up 100 kilometers of motorway up for tender, and there are bidders that submit their bids with a strict finance and time frame. And in fact, that's what all of us companies in the area need, planning reliability. No, I would be happy with that. Say, you have a route between A and B, you want to upgrade it and electrify it, and then why don't you invite building consortia to submit their bids, and Deutsche Bahn as well, of course, but not as the only contender. And those who can say, okay, we can do it in 7 or 12 years, in a given budget of 3.5 billion euros, they'll get the contract. They win the contract. If they can't make it, well, it's their problem. So we need to think in those bigger units plus funding, and then you can complete the whole project. Well, I think you wouldn't want to think only in bigger theories or bigger concepts here. What you're saying is a bit superficial. We need to work in work sites, in milestones. We have to be granular. It's true, you need to think big, but when you work, you don't need the bigger picture, but the smaller ones. Well, of course, I talked about the larger projects here, and this is why I said large numbers. If you have regional projects, you will work in smaller units, but I acknowledge that. But you've asked about new procedures and new mechanisms. It has been a bit of a problem in the past years, and maybe it will change now, that the federal government always attached importance to the big mainline services, just like Deutsche Bahn. The regional train of Reutlingen and Tübingen was not something that concerned them too much, but for a local provider it would be important, of course. And that was a different line of thinking at the time. We didn't get a lot of support from Deutsche Bahn or from political decision makers. Now this finally has changed. There is plenty of money now in the municipal transport financing law. We can work together with Deutsche Bahn or others to develop good, robust funding plans. We have regionalization funds that help us to do much more good regional work. So yes, I agree, something needs to be changing in the procedure, but I wouldn't completely revamp it or introduce a new system, because then we'd lose more time. Now, one more question. You talked about priorities here and said you shouldn't only check the hubs, the railway junctions and big projects, but the small ones as well. But you may get lost as well if you don't know where the priorities are and where to start first. So what would you want first? What would you recommend in terms of top priorities in order to come back to the topic of our discussion today? I think we need two lists of priorities. The mainline services first, that are important for our synchronized timetable, the interval of the Deutschlandtakt, as we call it. So it has political priorities, of course. A lot of money in the past has been invested there, but they were not relevant for the entire system. This is now changing, and our rail hubs are absolutely important, of course, because very often the junctions are a bottleneck. It's no good to build a new line and then you stop at Mannheim at the railway junction or Stuttgart and cannot get elsewhere from there. So these are important. But there's still equally important regional projects like commuter trains, regional trains. These are, for regional concerns, really one of an equally high priority. But this is not for the federal government to say. The state governments are in the say here. I said many years before that you should regionalize the branch lines or the secondary lines, call them regional lines, for which Deutsche Bahn cannot be in the driver's seat. Because if they are put in front of the alternative, they'll take responsibility for mainline services rather than regional. And what Mr. Pofalla has said is all very laudable, and it's good what they're doing. But I cannot ignore the fact that there's many small things that will not work if you apply them in a federal system or in a mainline project. Now, Mr. Pofalla, do you think all projects need to be separated? I don't think, because there was a faulty analysis in there. Our regional networks and the state they're in today are not because of our inability or incapacities, but because of the underfunding in the many decades before. So you have to separate cause and effect here. What is right, and I agree with Mr. Herrmann, is that the existing funding system, like the regional funds and the municipal transport financing law, have been boosted, and every single euro for regional work or for regional networks, I'll be happy to spend, definitely. We do have the capacities, and now apparently Deutsche Bahn as an employer is so attractive. We find enough new experts and new workers. Just this year, I need to hire an additional 1,000 technicians, and we get them. We're not lacking any qualified staff. We find them, we get them, and the assessment that we're running out of staff is not correct. And I'm already planning for next year, and we assume that we would hire another 1,000 technicians next year. When I started 3 years ago, we were at 8,000. By the end of the year, we have 12,000 technicians in the organization. With our planning capacities, we can put things into practice. This is not a problem, but at the end of the day, the funding sources have to be right. And Mr. Herrmann is right when he says, rather than discussing about a new funding system, which you could do, and I wouldn't be against it, but, you know, heaven forbid, let's leave it where it is. We are now in reasonably good shape with our financing structures we have. Try and invest them in rail now, rather than continuing to discuss for another 5 years how the system should look like. It is complex, it's true, it's complicated, but I'm really very glad and happy we are where we are now. And I wouldn't really get sidetracked talking about a new funding model. Although substantially or substantively, I think you could discuss this. No, we're not getting sidetracked here. It is a proposal to make the whole system more streamlined or lean. There was a lot of criticism earlier on the existing financing model to efficiently spend those funds. In the new budget, we see just once again there is some unspent money in digital technologies or digital upgrading. But no, we are doing much more than what you're suggesting in your question, because just for the recent board meeting, I have indicated 5 projects where we had a funding problem. But the funding problem only meant the funding agreement has not been signed with the stakeholders. So what do we do with those? We just front-load them. We pre-finance them ourselves. I'm not going to fail a project, or I'm not going to postpone a project just because of the money not being available. In a given case, a very important project in the north of Germany would have been delayed by 1 year just because the funding contract wasn't signed. So we front-loaded the investment. And there are a number of bureaucratic procedures between the Federal Railway Authority and the ministries, but you're not going to find any more single case now where the money is present, or but the formal funding agreement has not been signed. In such cases, we are just pre-financing that. We're not accepting any delay of project work. I can take a shortcut via the Board of Management of Deutsche Bahn, and then we get the funding agreement at a later point. This is not a problem for us anymore. What's the potential delay, if you are not financing it yourself? Well, you know, the system is such that the Federal Railway Authority has to approve it, then the Transport and the Finance Ministry need to check. Well, for God's sake, it takes another 3 or 4 months for any such project. But I'm absolutely against people saying that in Germany the implementation of a building project gets delayed because our funding system is complicated. It's not true. Well, I think we all should talk about how we invest those funds properly. Well, I told you about what our priorities are. I mean, what do you do in order to get the money to be spent really quickly? And it's not only about Deutsche Bahn, but all the operators or contractors that work for you, plus also the subcontractors. Well, I'm not going to talk here about the German construction industry or the planning industry, but all I can say is if those stakeholders don't increase their staffing levels, not you personally, but generally, the industry will have a hard time implementing all this work if they don't beef up their personnel capacities. And I've been talking with the railway industry for many years because I see where we're headed, where the growth trajectories are. And it's not that we're not preparing stuff incorrectly. No, we do. But I see with the increasing investment volumes in German industries, there will be some problems going forward because people can't deliver. Oh, well, Mr. Pofalla is painting a bit of a rosy picture here because he's done so much in the past. But, with hindsight, let us also look at the construction industry or at administrations. In Germany, we're talking about 20 to 30 years of spending reduction compared to other industries. This led to a situation where in the public, in general in the political arena, rail has lost its appeal. This had an impact on career choices of young people. They didn't find it attractive to join this industry, especially when now engineers retire in the next 5 to 10 years. We don't have enough up-and-coming technical qualified staff engineers to follow suit. It's not only about engineers, it's about planners, it's about project managers. We need actually many more project managers to steer the projects in different areas, bring together different disciplines. And then in the next 10 years, we are going to convert to mechanisms like BIM, which stands for Building Information Modeling, which is a new digital technology of planning and building. Now we need many more people who can do that, engineers plus technical experts or IT experts. So we require many more qualified people, the young generation, across all walks of life, construction workers, managers, planners, everyone. And therefore, sooner or later, we need really a very targeted training campaign, beginning with Deutsche Bahn, private economies, public administrations. Perhaps we should strike a genuine alliance to campaign for job careers in infrastructure, because you're doing something for the public good, you're doing something for climate action, etc. But some of these activities will exist, but we have realized earlier that when you try to find good, skilled labor, it takes you much longer than in the past. We can still fill the positions, also in administration, but it takes longer than before. And the more people leave us, the harder it gets to fill those vacancies. So I think for that we need to change a number of processes, especially on the implementation side. We need to get more streamlined, leaner. Just earlier we talked about the time frame of planning. We had a case where it has taken us 1 year after a project that has been approved actually got finally signed off by the different authorities. So some of these approval processes must be accelerated. And then all of these laws to speed up planning are beginning at the wrong with the wrong proviso, because they think they need to hear pressure groups first and environmental protection agencies, but we need to improve the general realization, the implementation side. I mean, a lot has been done in the past where different planning authorities came into play. Regionals, federal ones, the Federal Railway Authority, many different stakeholders. Now this has been changed. All planning approval has been migrated to the Federal Railway Authority. That is difficult also because they are lacking some regional competence. But they may be a bottleneck in the future unless the Federal Railway Authority hires regional expertise. Because otherwise we have a lot of money, but people who cannot handle planning-wise all this money. So let us critically look at these processes that are particularly time-consuming. We talk about different levels that are checking each other. Checks and balances is good when we're talking about power, of course, but when we talk about construction work and implementation, this is time-consuming and very complex. And those long processes are related to our procedural barriers in the system and agreement and alignments and responsibilities. So I think we need to pool those efforts more and communicate about them better. Now, Ms. Seichert, you are one of those who actually suffer from the lengthy planning procedures. What does that practically mean for you? When you need an approval or project planning approval, where are the problems? Well, to be quite honest, what you're saying is right. In the past years, we've seen that many of our technical staff who are actually supposed to work at the track site need to do much more paperwork, documentation, and sometimes, we have people that don't want to do that. Their work is out there in the field. They don't want to sit behind their desks and filling in forms. And then sometimes some of them work 3 out of 5 days in the office rather than in the open. Then I don't know if this is just the Federal Railway Authority, as you said. We should make sure that our technical staff do the technical work that they're supposed to cut the red tape. There is a bit of a mania of documentation in this country. There are construction site apps, of course, electronic apps, but still so much work needs to be photographed, needs to be printed out, needs to be documented with signatures. We could save much more time by pruning back that jungle. And don't just think BIM, Building Information Modeling, is the only tool that allows us to do that. It's a very good technical tool, but if you do worksite documentation, that doesn't go back to BIM. And what you need documentation is because we do a lot of electrification work. I mean, we're not building bridges or big stretches of track, but we need to know at what mileage post is the trapdoor. We're building the conductor lines. We need to know where the cable ducts are. These are small, banal things, but they're going to be very important later on in service and maintenance, of course. So, BIM cannot do everything, but we're on a good way forward. But please, remember, our technical staff can do a lot with a shovel and with a hammer, but they don't want to sit in an office at the desk. But can you actually find enough personnel, good staff? Well, we are very active, and I know that Deutsche Bahn is doing quite a lot. They do good career advertising for the rail industry or the rail businesses, and they're already coming to fruition, those efforts, that is true. But I'm really worried about really skilled labor becoming extinct. It's like a top athlete. If you have someone who's done an apprenticeship or studied and bring them to a machine tool, it's too late. They cannot go to any Olympic Games anymore. If you want to be an Olympic performer, you have to start early. And we are now having problems that we don't have enough vocational schools where our people are being trained. Some are travel all the way to Brandenburg to sit in classes there. This is not admissible, and I'm sure you know what I'm talking about here. What apprentices are you talking about? What schools? Well, for instance, the qualification of industrial electricians. They're not offered anymore. What does it mean? They cannot be trained? I have one vocational school in Spandau where they can go, but and that course is being phased out, and that's very disappointing. Schools don't offer that anymore? Well, I think for all of you who have been in a school like that, it's not nice, it's not enjoyable. There's a single teacher. When that teacher is ill, there's no one to replace them. Some of these technical skills are being ignored, and once they're finished, they have no practical work experience at all, not to talk about lack of digital technologies. But you're saying you're at the end of the chain between prioritization and planning and implementation, then there's some missing links there. Well, it works pretty well, I'm saying, but still, I'm concerned that we don't get good, young, qualified workers. Something should have been changed 10 years ago. We're now trying to change course. We are on a good way forward. Maybe Deutsche Bahn is in a bit of possession because they're well known. Well, we all depend on each other, really. But still, okay, let's settle down a bit here. I agree with the problems that you have just mentioned, but let's get the priorities right. What you're talking about is important, but I wouldn't think at all that these are really our acute problems that we're facing together. Well, we're talking about technical staff that can work at the track side or do broadband extension. So I'm trying to make sure that I keep them in my industry. Now, until December 2021, we need to spend all these funds, and we're certainly happy to have such a good economic situation given those difficult conditions we're in right now. But there's so much more work now that needs to be done. It's not only trackside repairs, but also broadband extension or road construction. There's only so many people who can do that. Yeah, but if you had been around in our meetings 2 years ago, there were many complaints and problems that were related to the lack of funds. Today, it's an entirely different system. We have plenty of money, but we have implementation side problems. I would prefer those problems now, or these we have now, over those we had 2 years ago. I mean, of course, there are some road bumps there in putting that all into practice. I wouldn't deny that. But if you take a fresh look now at the rail sector, we must realize that rail today, as we speak, thanks to the political decisions of our federal government and of parliament, enjoys a priority that we would have wished for many decades. Which means you can get staff quicker than you get money? Is that what you're saying? Now, we are in a luxurious situation that we all work together now. That's true, and that people really have the perspective that things are continuing in the right way. I mean, what is important is that the money stays in the system. It's not that it's a flash in the pan where in 2 years' time everything is empty. We had a problem in the past where you had earmarked funds that you couldn't extend over the period of, say, a year. And you really need to think decades in transport infrastructure, because it takes us decades of years to improve massively the system. And we have to be patient and tell people they have to be patient. We want to double our passenger volume in this country in terms of passenger kilometers. 25% of all freight to be carried on rail by 2030. This is highly ambitious, so I absolutely agree. And as a Green Party politician, I would say, okay, this is ambitious and I don't want more. If we achieve that, this is quite something. And then by 2050, we want to be climate neutral in Germany. Remember that? Which means even more freight to be converted to rail between 2030 and 2050. This is quite a tall order. And then we need to talk about digital rail projects, another 20% capacity utilization. But we also need to double the infrastructure in the hubs and railway junctions. So it's not just good for small individual transport or logistics centers. We need good freight villages, a modal split between road and rail, and there we go from there. So a lot needs to be done, I agree. So we need this perseverance now already. And then finally, don't forget our waterways. I mean, waterways have dramatically been phased down in the past years. 7% of freight today is carried on ships on our waterways. We need to revamp our locks. There's plenty of space there. Yeah, but now we talk about rail. And I learned one thing when I joined this industry, and that's quite remarkable in this industry. They stick together. It's like a big family, and we all work together. And you're absolutely right with what you said before. We have the money, we can do it, and we will get it done together. And a bit self-critical vis-à-vis Deutsche Bahn. And when I must say that in the past years, digital technologies were, well, rejected to a certain degree. And then we changed tack 3 years ago. And now, if you look at us here, thinking about the Stuttgart project, we now have come to the first funding agreement, which looks at the build-up of the digital junction or the digital hub at Stuttgart. The Stuttgart network gets funded with this digital program upgrade, and this is going to happen, by 2025, not in the next decades, but in very few years, 5 years. So we're showing at what pace we can work here today. Between the first time the project got launched and to the completion of the implementation side. You should never be too happy and too complacent, but still, what we've done so far and the speed we've developed is just massive compared to what we've had in the past years. I'm absolutely in agreement with you, because if we hadn't stepped up that pressure a couple of years ago together, we would have ended up with a situation where we have a great new infrastructure project with old conventional control and safety technology. But we have changed course here. We have the funding agreement, and by the way, funding is also true for rolling stock. Now, we found that important as well. So, it's also a lot of money that the federal state there has to be paid. 1/3 of the cost will be paid by us, so it's quite a sizable amount of money. But this is perfectly justifiable for the resilience of the system and the capacity of the system as well. And I know how long it takes us to build hardware infrastructure. So the software infrastructure has to be utilized here as well. The Stuttgart project is a digital one in many ways. The digital hub of Stuttgart is going to be a role model, probably not only for Germany but also for Europe. It's the largest contiguous rail hub. We're talking about 2 billion euros that this digital hub costs us. We'll start with commuter trains, then regional trains, and then we extend it to the larger Stuttgart rail network, including also ATO. So we don't do just ETCS, but also automatic train operation, digital interlocking, so it's going to be an integrated project. And it's more than time to do that, because other industries have been more digital than us for many years. But do you think that this funding instrument is an efficient funding tool also for other projects? Now, what was important is that the federal government has committed to take a capital share also in the conversion of rolling stock, because in the past the federal states would order transportation services and the infrastructure was provided by the federal government. But now digitization means infrastructure is built on board our rolling stock. So there's actually cost that the train operators need to recoup because of the latest in technological developments. And it would not be good at all if the federal government had not realized they need to pay part of those costs as well, infrastructure built into the rolling stock. And if we manage to do that, then it's going to work. If not, the states are not going to do it, because they don't have enough funds that we have as regionalization funds. If you want to double passenger volumes by 2030, it's not going to happen overnight with the same amount of rolling stock. You need more and shorter intervals. Well, isn't that a good concept to be applied in other regions as well? Well, let me ask you one final question, because we are approaching the end of our discussion here today. You say doubling of passengers by 2030, freight traffic to account for 25% of market share on rail by 2025, if I remember correctly. Do you believe that this can be done? Well, to be quite honest, it has to work. If we don't do that, we can, forget our climate action targets by 2025. So we cannot extend the timeline for our targets. We've lost a lot of time already, but now finally, here's the time, here's the money, and we should do it right now. And today we have a bigger consensus in society than we had 10 years ago. Because I've been in this forum here quite a few years ago, where, I was the only one who said, look, I'm the lone voice to say there's rail and climate action that are related, where everyone else just talked about road transportation. This is different now, fundamentally different. Now the Grand Coalition pays major attention to rail projects. It has taken them quite a while. 20 years ago, they were tearing down tracks and selling the railway undertakings. So it's like a sea change that we're seeing here today. And if we cannot do it now, I don't know how we can save our planet. Okay, 25% of rail and freight traffic? Well, I agree. It can be done, but we need planning reliability more than anything. At the end of the food chain, we need to know, can we build? Yes, no, start, stop. You know what I'm talking about. We need to put a stop to that. So what do we know? We need from administrators. We need to be sure that we can access funds for the time we need, even if the project is a longer one. Well, I'm in agreement with Mr. Herman as well. Germany's climate targets will not be met if we cannot do it, because these are related, those effects, causes and effects. The government also supports rail with our climate package, so there are dozens of billions of euros spent there, because the CO2 savings are obviously increasing positive potential in the transport sector. So yes, we can do it, but we have to do it. Thank you very much. I think we all realize that a lot needs to be done in the years to come. Thank you very much to our audience, and have a great day.